In this video, we will be learning all about OpenAI's Python SDK, and we will be learning how to use it to call large language models and build a very simple agentic workflow. So quickly, I want to go over the documentation for the Python SDK. I have a link to this in the description, so feel free to check it out. What you'll need is an API key. You don't actually have to use OpenAI. You can use Google Gemini, Cloud, whatever LLM. You just have to have the API key. And so for me, I'm going to be showing you OpenAI. So I just created that key over at platform.openai.com. But I've also been playing around with this with Gemini, doing that as well. So once you have that API key, be sure to save it somewhere, and I will show you how to configure that in just a minute. Obviously, you will need to install the OpenAI library on your machine, probably using npm. I'm not going to go over that for the sake of time, assuming that you're able to do that. And then here's a basic example of how you can use that, basically just creating an instance of that library called client, and using a method called responses.create to basically choose your model and write a prompt and then output the response, similar to how you would if you were typing into ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini. I also provided a link to the actual GitHub library. So let's jump into the demo itself. And I'm going to be running this using Cursor, but you can also use whatever development, whatever IDE you wish it could be. First of all, what will we be doing today? We will be building a very simple agentic workflow. We're going to give it just a little bit of autonomy. It's going to choose a scenario based on sports, a current scenario, and then it's going to generate a hot take about that scenario. Then it's going to improve upon that hot take, and then it's going to provide a counter argument and kind of rebuttal against that hot take. So let's get started. First of all, let's import our libraries. Secondly, we are going to load in the API key. And how you do that is you actually save that in a file called .env, and then the library actually knows to go and look for a file with that name, and it will grab your API key and save it. So let's start by importing our necessary library. So obviously we're going to use the OpenAI library, and we need this load.env library, which will look for our API key, and then we're going to be using this display and this markdown library in order to display our results. So go ahead and run that. Let me show you how the how to do the API key. So I have actually this in the same directory. I have this .env file. I'm not going to open it because that has my API key in it, but I have created this .env demo file to kind of show you what that looks like. So what I did is you create the API key, and then you have to put OpenAI underscore API underscore key equals, and then your key. Same thing with Gemini, but just a different name, Google underscore API underscore key with your token. And for the different models, you have to find out what the name should be, but it's pretty simple that way. And again, just .env should be the name. I just added demo to emphasize that this was just for demos purposes. Okay, and so let's run this. We can import our libraries, and then we use load.env to load in our API key, and then we create an instance of the OpenAI library. We'll run that. Okay, let's move on to step 2. Let's create our workflow by defining the functions that the workflow will use. So here is a summary of all the functions that we will be building. First, we're going to do a function that creates a scenario. So it gets a recent sports scenario. Then we do our hot take. So we generate a hot take based on that scenario. We generate an analysis. So we expand upon that hot take, give reasoning and examples, and then we do our counter argument. All right, so let's get started. So first, we're going to create the generate scenario function, which creates a scenario of its choice. We give it the autonomy to choose a scenario with some parameters, with some guidelines. So then they're all kind of structured the same. So first of all, we use this client object, which, as a reminder, we created up here, which is just an instance of the OpenAI library. And then that has a method called responses.create. And inside of that, we give it a few different arguments. We give it the model. Again, this could be any model you choose as long as you have the API keys set up correctly. It doesn't have to be ChatGPT, and it doesn't have to be the 4.1 mini model. Just keep in mind, the bigger the model, the more expensive it's going to be. Then we give it the prompt. We tell it to generate a sports scenario for a hot take. The scenario should be real, recent news story within the last 30 days. I did have to, in order to get the scenario to be current, I did have to add this tool that comes with this library, which allows it to search the web. Before, when I didn't have that, it was coming up with scenarios, but they were not recent. They were coming from whenever the model was last trained. So they were very out of date. Okay, so we've created this function. And now we're going to create the generate hot take function, which is going to be very similar, again, using the responses.create method. Using the same model, and we give it the prompt, you are a sports analyst, create a bold but reasonable hot take about the scenario. We give it the scenario, which is passed in as parameter, and then we give it some additional guidelines, make sure it's appropriate, and only return the hot take, no other text. Okay? So moving on to the next one, generate analysis. So we're going to improve upon the hot take that we created in the previous step. Expand on this sports hot take with clear reasoning and simple examples. We give it the hot take, which was passed in as the parameter, again using responses.create, and then tell it to make sure it's appropriate, and only return the analysis, no other text. And lastly, we create the counter argument function. Using the same method, using the same model. We say counter against this analysis, find weak points, incorrect statements, provide counter arguments with examples and evidence. Plug in that analysis from the previous function, and again give it those same guidelines. Okay, so now we've defined all these functions. So now let's actually run these functions sequentially as a workflow. So you see here, generate the scenario, plug in that scenario into the hot take generator, then we plug in the hot take into the analysis generator, we plug in that analysis into our counter argument generator. So I'm going to run it. It's going to take a second or a few seconds because it's actually doing quite a few things. Okay, so for me it took about 21 seconds. And let's go ahead and view the results. We're going to review each of the results one by one using the display and markdown libraries that we installed at the beginning. What this does, it just basically gives you a nice clean printout in markdown format. So we say display, first we're going to display the scenario, which again was saved as a variable up here. And this is an old one, so when I click run, it's going to give us our new one. I don't know what it's going to be. Okay, so it's about the Winter Olympics. So the 2026 Winter Olympics in Milan have been marred by environmental and logistical challenges, including deforestation for infrastructure and the use of artificial snow, requiring nearly 1 million cubic meters of water. And then it also talks about some geopolitical tensions. Okay, so that's a very interesting topic. Now we're going to look at the hot take that it generated. And I'm not going to read through the entirety of these because they are a little bit long, and I think you get the idea just from the summary. So our hot take, the 2026 Winter Olympics, environmental damage and strained geopolitical neutrality reveal that the games are no longer a celebration of global unity and athleticism, but a costly backdrop for political posturing. Very interesting. Okay, so now it's going to improve upon that analysis and give some examples. So this is going to be a lot longer. So it's talking about those challenges again. It's going into the environmental damage. It's talking more about the geopolitical tensions. And then it's talking about how that impacts the fans and the athletes. It gives a summary. Okay, so you can see it's expanded upon that hot take and improved upon it. And now we're going to look at the counter argument. So the counter argument is, yes, we do have those challenges, but it's also a demonstration of resilience and potential positive impact. And then it gives some reasoning. It talks about the environmental challenges, gives some arguments against it. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It addresses the geopolitical tensions, and then it talks about, addresses the impact for fans and athletes, and gives a conclusion. So you can see it gave a counter argument with a different opinion. And, there you have it. That's how you can create a very simple agentic workflow. And you can hopefully, based on that demonstration, you can come up with some ideas of how you can do a similar thing and make a different workflow of your choice. So it's very exciting, very interesting. I hope that you found it helpful, that you found it interesting. If you did, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. And thank you for watching.